we have Mr. Anthony Sammarco. We're so happy to have you. You've been here a few times.
I have,
We've
yes.
covered
Thank you.
different books, so definitely a hit. Anthony's a noted historian and author of over 70 books on the history and development of Boston, and he lectures widely on the history and development of his native city. He teaches popular course Boston history at BU, Metropolitan College, and he lives between Boston and Osterville on Cape Cod. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for coming out today. It's a beautiful day. It's not a little bit too sunny, but it's quite nice. No, I love Cohasset. I had cousins that lived here, and when we summered in Green Harbor, we used to see them because they would come and drive. My parents never drove a car, so once we got to Green Harbor, we were stuck there until the Sunday before Labor Day. But this is one of the many books that I've been writing. I just finished my 90th book, which was on the Christmas tree shop. And many people remember it as a great place for a bargain. Right now, I'm writing a book on Prince Macaroni Company. And Joe Pellegrino, who actually inherited the company from his father, was at Harvard with my father. So I look at these as something that not only do I remember, but I'm sure all of you remember. Well, this series of traditions in Boston is something that I began writing for Fonthill in London about 5 years ago. Not only did I do a book on Easter traditions in Boston, but I did St. Valentine's Day, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. And right now I'm writing 4th of July or Independence Day in Boston. These are things in some ways as we probably celebrated, and many of us share that memory. But the whole concept is that this book on Easter is not just religious, but it's also secular. And in some ways, how our parents and grandparents and even great-grandparents celebrated Easter is kind of a fun thing. My publisher is incredible. This photograph on the cover came from eBay. Not only was it interesting, but it was black and white. He not only colorized it, but it shows the gluttonous, covetous eyes of those 3 little girls looking at the baskets of not only a chocolate Easter bunny, but eggs. And you began to realize in some ways that Easter in some ways is a secular holiday as well. Well, it was a fun thing to see it colorized because in this instance, we began to realize that Easter was something that was really quite special and still is. Noah Webster describes Easter as an annual Christian festival in the spring, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. And though a solemn religious holiday preceded by 40 days of Lent and a solemn Holy Week, it would evolve into a day that is celebrated not just with religious services, but also with Easter bunnies and Easter baskets. Early Christians chose to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus on the same date as the Jewish Passover, which usually fell around the 14th day of the month of Nisan, which was in March or April. And these Christians were popularly known as the Quartodemicians, which means that they were the 14ers. And by the 17th century, a German tradition evolved of an Easter hare bringing eggs to good children, as hares and rabbits had long been associated with spring seasonal rituals because of their amazing powers of fertility. In fact, decorated eggs had long been a part of the Easter festival, and given the obvious symbolism of new life, were representative of the resurrection. A vast amount of folklore surrounds the Easter egg, and in a number of Eastern European countries, the process of decorating the eggs is extremely elaborate and colorful. Well, in this instance, I begin this with something that deals with the religious overtones, especially during Holy Week. This is a painting, Christ Carrying the Cross, painted in 1505 by Andrea Solario. He was an Italian Renaissance painter of the Milanese school who was considered one of the most important followers of Leonardo da Vinci. He depicts Jesus Christ carrying the cross with a crown of thorns to his crucifixion. But the emotional aspect of this powerful image is given added force by the introduction of the new dramatic language of expression and gesture with the anguish on the tear-stained face of Jesus Christ. During this period of the 14th, 15th, and 16th century, most of our ancestors were illiterate, and the only way they knew the teachings of the Bible was by stained glass windows or paintings. And in this way, we began to realize that here, Christ before the high priest, painted in 1617 by Gerard von Hornhorst, when Christ was brought before the high priest by Roman soldiers and was questioned about his teachings and false testimony that was called against him. You can begin to see it's not just the facial expressions, but the illumination of Jesus' face along with a single candle. These were not only important, but they also began to realize in some ways that Holy Week, which we're in today, shows Jesus Christ with a crown of thorns. And again, painted in 1635 by Matthias Stom, a member of the Caravaggi. Stom, like his mentor Caravaggio, painted with naturalism and drama high in their pictorial subjects. This masterful painting depicts Jesus Christ in a nighttime scene of torment, illuminated by a single candle held by the man on the right, creating a strong effect of light and dark and good and evil. During this period, you began to see Christ depicted many different ways, but in my opinion, this painting of Christ and Thorns, painted in 1888 by Karl Heinrich Bloch, is probably the most evocative. His face shows despair and hurt, as well as misunderstanding. The crown of thorns, along with the broken palm frond, shows him as somebody who, even in the late 19th century, was beginning in some ways to become part of this whole aspect of the crucifixion. Christ Crucified, painted in 1632 by Diego Velázquez. In this painting, Velázquez depicts Jesus Christ with a gentle halo enveloping his lowered head, nailed to the cross with his feet together and supported on a little wooden brace in a classic contrapposto posture. In this instance, we see that eventually, after his crucifixion, he was placed in a tomb. And on Sunday, the resurrection, this painting in 1881 by Karl Heinrich Bloch. I want to mention one thing. Bloch painted over 300 paintings dealing with Jesus during Holy Week and shows Jesus emerging from the tomb. Jesus Christ is victorious over death and emerges from his tomb with adoring angels and white lilies at the tomb. The whole aspect is, in this instance, this was the way people celebrated in Europe. But in America, it was a little bit different because in 1630, the Puritans from England settled in Boston. They created Massachusetts Bay Colony, and the Pilgrims created Plymouth Bay Colony. During that period of the 17th century, we had to realize that all papist religious holidays were banned. And not only did we see Christmas banned legally in 1659, but Easter would never be celebrated until the early part of the 18th century. And the reason was, with the aspect of Henry VIII and his 6 wives, he not only broke ties with Rome and papal holidays, but he also created the Church of England. Well, seen here, one of his descendants, James II and the 7th of Scotland, was King of England and Ireland, and James II and King of Scotland as James VII. And during the interregnum and his father's exile in France, this is the 1670s, he had increasingly began to accept the beliefs and ceremonies of the Roman Catholic Church. The reluctant acceptance of Easter in Massachusetts Bay Colony was imposed upon by the Puritans, and though not legally banned, was totally ignored. In this way, we realized that during the latter part of the 17th century, to reassert control over Massachusetts Bay Colony, the king would appoint a royal governor. And this was Royal Governor Sir Edmund Andros, and he was appointed Royal Governor of the Dominion of New England in 1686, and he restricted town meetings, restored the papist holidays, celebrated royal holidays, and allowed a maypole to be set up in Charlestown, and appropriated a Puritan meeting house for Christ of England, a Church of England services, and through these actions became one of the most vilified persons in Boston. In the 17th century, Boston had few people coming that were not English. And during that period, it also had the people that were the descendants of the Puritans. As a result, the new royal governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony took upon himself to take the Old South Meeting House, a Puritan bastion at the corner of Washington Street and Milk Street in downtown Boston, and in this building the first Easter celebration was held in Boston. He began to realize this wasn't just any meeting house, this was also the meeting house of Samuel Sewall, my 15th great-grandfather. I think we look alike. A judge in the province of Massachusetts Bay, he was said to have crossed out all the papist holidays in his journal. And he said, I blotted against February 14th, Valentine, March 25th, the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mother, April 24th, Easter, September 29th, Michaelmas, and December 25th, Christmas, and no more. Though this was now something that was being celebrated in Boston, many of the Puritans and their descendants totally ignored it, and it would continue right through the 18th and very early 19th century. But the concept was, by the early 19th century, Boston was changing. Boston, which had a population of about 18,000 people in 1800, had, within that first half century, would actually see people coming from Ireland, England, Germany, and many other Western European countries. And they brought with them the traditions that they knew. Yes, some were Protestant, but many were Roman Catholic. One of the people that actually began to transform the way Bostonians celebrated Easter was Louis Prang. You probably know the name. Avenue Louis Prang is where Boston Latin School is located in the Fenway. But Louis Prang produced Christmas, Easter, and other holiday cards in the United States. But it was said during his successful career that his cards had an individual charm, not merely in design, but in technique, lettering, the stock used, and their almost perfect coloring. And by the late 19th century, his multicolored chromolithography was considered the foremost art publishing company in the United States. He was German. He came here in 1848 from Germany during the social upheavals, and he lived in Roxbury, Massachusetts, where he began as a printer. But by the 1850s, he became a chromolithographer, and this actually shows Prang's Easter cards, Jesus, surrounded by, of course, Madonna lilies, and the light of the Holy Spirit descending upon his head. This is something that's very different than printing. A lithographer has stones, and each of these stones are cut in such a way that when they're dipped into a specific color, build upon the picture to create a multicolored image. And if you look at this, we probably have at least 8 or 9 different colors. So it's a very labor-intensive but very effective way to create a chromolithograph. In many instances, these were done not just religious, but also things like Home Sweet Home that you would actually hang in your house. But during this period, Prang, who had once been in partnership with a man by the name of Julius Mayer, would strike out on his own and erect L. Prang and Company art publishing house that was built in 1872 on Roxbury Street in Roxbury, behind Prang's home, seen on the left of Center Street. This still stands. It's been repurposed for residential housing, but this was a place where over 150 people were employed to make greeting cards. 60% were women, 40% were men who did most of the publishing and printing. But in this instance, Prang had begun his career in lithography printing with Julius Mayer as Prang and Mayer in 1856. And in 1860, he bought out his partner and formed the L. Prang Company. Prang Company brought art to the middle class at reasonable prices, and their Easter greeting cards were not just artistic, but on the cutting edge of design. In that instance, this card, which was done probably around 1872, has no religious overtones. Prang has done this with Easter at the top, but he shows the resurrection of Jesus Christ through the blooming of spring flowers. And they're not only beautifully done, but you can see a variety of colors. This card says, "Strong as a man and pure as a child is the sum of the doctrine, when the Divine One taught and suffered and died on the cross for." In that instance, these were beautifully done, and many of the women who actually worked for him became well known during their lifetimes. The Easter lily cross was designed by Olive Elizabeth Springer Whitney as a flower-decorated cross with Madonna lilies and lilies of the valley for Louis Prang. By 1881, L. Prang and Company employed more than 100 women as designers, artists, finishers, and embellishers, and Whitney was the resident designer and well respected for her flower paintings, illustrations, and designs. Well, during this period, you began to realize Easter was becoming something that was celebrated throughout Boston, not just in Roman Catholic churches, but surprisingly in Episcopal and the Anglican Church, which was the Old North Church in Boston. This wonderful card said, "Easter greetings, 3 angels sing to us." And you began to realize that this was something that now could be mailed to family and friends who might be a little too far away to actually join as a family dinner on the holiday. But Louis Prang's art was something that was to be considered one of the foremost chromolithographic art of the 19th century. This is a card in some ways that's 8 by 11. I own it. And it shows, of course, an angel holding a palm frond standing in front of the open tomb of Jesus Christ. Well, the angel at the tomb of Christ, probably one of the more impressive chromolithographs that Louis Prang produced, depicts an angel holding a palm frond and a trumpet standing outside the open tomb of Jesus Christ. There were 2 angels at the tomb of Jesus. As one rolled away the stone, they both helped Jesus from the tomb. And the palm frond is a symbol of victory, triumph, peace, and eternal life. "He is risen" is written on the rock on the right. During the 1870s through the 1890s, Prang would offer to any artist, both professional or amateur, that if they submitted a card, whether it was for Christmas or Easter or even St. Valentine's Day, they would win a competition. And $2,000 in that period was about half the annual income of a well-to-do family. He encouraged people to realize that his art was something that could be enjoyed by the masses. But at the turn of the 20th century, Prang's cards, which usually cost between 50 cents and $1, which would be the equivalent today between $12 and $20, would actually see the printing of penny postcards. This Easter greetings shows a rabbit bearing a woven wicker basket on its back filled with colored eggs and a pussy willow walking stick, arriving for Easter Sunday. And during the Middle Ages, people began decorating eggs and eating them as a treat following Mass on Easter Sunday after having fasted, or if they didn't, they should have, through 40 days of Lent. Well, the Easter bunny would bring eggs, the resurrection. It was also the new spring. And in that instance, these cards themselves, done at the turn of the 20th century, were incredible. I don't think anybody as a child ever asked, how did eggs come with a rabbit or a hare? Well, it was something that was part of the tradition, and this came from Germany. And these cards are beautifully done, and they don't really create comment. But a lot of times we began to realize that artists would actually begin to take it one step further. And in the 20th century, it wasn't just Louis Prang. There were thousands of people. One woman was Tasha Tudor. I don't know, has anybody ever heard of Tasha Tudor? She was a fascinating woman, and her real name was Starling Burgess. But her mother divorced her father, and of course, she became Tasha Tudor, her mother's family name. She was a fascinating author and artist whose greeting cards evoke an old-fashioned quality and the charm of home life. And she was known across the country for her glowing watercolors depicting all of New England rural scenes of a century ago, and for her exquisite painting of children, flowers, and animals. She was probably best known for her corgi dogs, and she wrote a series of books on them, over 100. But she was somebody who created, for many of her illustrated books, this, Happy Easter. And this showed her children around a tree that she called an Easter egg tree. And again, these were hollowed out shells decorated with different colors and painted, along with wonderful terracotta pots of all the spring flowers. I love it because even the birds within this intertwined vine create the whole aspect of the resurrection of Jesus Christ through spring. Tasha Tudor was somebody in some ways that had not only greeting cards, books, but her paintings were incredible. And seen here, these two children are in the children's room at the Brookline Public Library in 1950 with an Easter egg tree and a copy of The Easter Tree, written by Catherine Milhouse, which was awarded the Caldecott Medal in 1951. In the book, Milhouse writes about a Pennsylvania Dutch family and their Easter celebration with Easter eggs found in the family attic that had been painted by their grandmother when she was a little girl. The family hung the decorated eggs from the branches of the tiny tree, which became an Easter tree, and so began a very special Easter tradition. We did this as a child, and I think in some ways today when I pass houses, I see Easter egg trees on the front lawn. Well, it was an important feature to realize that during this period, many of these different people were creating Easter cards. By the 1940s and 50s, it was a much larger population. And of course, if you're as old as I am, I remember a 4-cent postage stamp. It's very different today. Seen here is Joyce Clyde Hall on the right-hand side. He created Hallmark cards, and one of his many artists that he hired to actually depict many different covers for cards, including Easter, was Norman Rockwell. Well, Norman Rockwell was an artist who chronicled middle-class life throughout the 1940s to the 1970s. And in this instance, Joyce Clyde Hall not only had over 1,000 employees, but he also had many artists, including Winston Churchill, that would create these wonderful cards. Some were religious, but many were secular. I love this card. Norman Rockwell was associated with Hallmark cards in the post-World War II era when he created some of the most charming greeting cards of the period. This iconic painting, Easter Morning, was on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post in 1959 and depicts a father reading the Sunday newspaper as he crouches in his Eames chair as his wife and children, in their Easter finery, clutching their Bibles, walk behind him to attend church. We all know that one brother-in-law, but the whole concept is it shows in that instance something that made us laugh. Because, of course, going to church is one of those days throughout the year we see more people that we've never even seen for over a year. Well, many other artists included, of course, Russ Craft greeting card. Now, initially, they were in Boston's South End, but they moved to Dedham in the 1950s. Russ Craft was a popular greeting card company that was started by Fred Winslow Rust in 1906 in Kansas City, Missouri. He eventually came to Boston. Fred Rust was later to be joined by his brother Donald Rust, and their cards always strove to maintain the highest standards in design, reproduction, and composition. Some of his cards were really quite fun. I don't know what a kitten jumping out of a tall-ware teapot has to do with Easter, but it says Easter greetings to a special friend of mine. It's adorable, but he also had artists on staff that created many different types of cards, not only with animals, religious, but also secular. And in that way, there was even Norcross cards. And this was June Norcross Webster, and she was the co-founder in 1924 of Norcross Greeting Card Company with her brother, Arthur Dickinson Norcross, in New York City. It was said that from the start, Norcross cards had a look which contributed to their selling success, although through the years, the company commanded only a small share of the greeting card market. You can begin to see how many different cards there were. But in that instance, June was quite an artist, and she was innovative in such a way as using a piece of satin that would be embossed with Easter and an Easter lily. Beautifully done, terribly different, but also equally effective. So this was a kind of a thing that many people realized that they could actually send to friends and family. But maybe you would actually have colored Easter eggs like I did as a child. Normally I had more dye on me than the eggs, but this was Flex, and they were certified Easter egg colors that have been known since 1889, when they were offered by J.J. Fleck with pure color ingredients. with a charismatic rabbit strutting on the cover of the box with top hat, morning coat, striped trousers, and cane, it offered popular colors for eggs. And by the 1970s, the Fleck Egg Dye Company had grown to be the second largest egg dye company in the United States. This was something that you could actually do at home, and at that time it was only 10 cents. But one of the more popular ones, in some ways, created this: a woman sitting at the kitchen table, glasses in front of her with the different dyes diluted with water, and she paints Easter eggs. But look at the edge of that paintbrush. A little chick tells her how to paint it or what color. Well, this was something that was kind of fun, and it did take quite some time, whether you were an adult or a child. But eventually, the one that I really remember was RIT, Easter Egg Coloring Kit. Now, my mother and sister would dye shoes to actually match a dress. And I can remember looking at these things and wondering, why did they bother? But it was a big thing in the 1950s and 60s. Here, not only did you have an Easter bunny and you had an Easter chick, but you also had dinosaurs in the beginning. And it says, Easter egg dress-ups for moon visit. So we know this is 1969. By that period, these different things encompassed the whole aspect. And here, grandchildren of my mother's very best friend, who are now in college, actually dye the eggs. And these were things that you could place into pre-holed cartons. And it was something that not only would they dry beautifully, but they could be hidden not only in the house, but on the grounds for people to have an Easter egg hunt. Well, in many instances, we all looked at one time to see a woman with an Easter bonnet. Easter bonnets could be really very traditional or very simple. But Woolworths, and this is a photograph from 1950, would sell tremendous numbers of hats. This woman with a straw hat with not only a carnation, but daisies. Oh, did I? Oh, thank you. This woman not only is at Woolworths, but she also has a hat, straw, with daisies and a carnation, but she's looking at a dozen different hats. Normally, these were available for less than $1.99 at the time, but you could embellish them with ribbons or other things. This was a photograph of a milliner in Quincy Center. This woman herself, actually, with her mink coat, we always shop with our mink, would actually come to the man to choose a hat for Easter Sunday. But I love the photograph of her son in the foreground. He's also trying a hat. He contacted me on Facebook one time and he said, "You know, I'm an attorney." And I said, "No, I didn't know that," because I knew the family in Milton. And I gathered I was actually insulting him by showing this photograph in the book. So every Easter, I always make sure to put it on Facebook. But you could actually make a statement walking up the aisle of your place of worship with not just a hat, but straw that has a live duckling. Now, you can imagine this duck quacking to the tunes of the various songs that everyone's singing, but it was kind of a fun thing to see. You could be unique, you could be very outre, but people began to realize in some ways there was even the Hat Sisters, very well known in Boston and Provincetown, and they were best friends with Mayor Tom Menino, mayor of the city of Boston. I like their hats. There's something you might have seen in the 1950s that Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, might have worn. But in this way, a hat was an important feature. But religious services, which continue to this day, have always been something that made people realize in some ways this is a sense of not only rebirth, but also the aspect of the resurrection of Jesus. And here, hundreds of people gather in 1938 to greet the rising sun at an ecumenical Easter sunrise service sponsored by WEEI CBS Radio at Mount Hood in Melrose, Massachusetts. The town of Melrose had recently acquired 210 acres and began the development of the Mount Hood Park and Golf Course in the 1930s. And the park and golf course were completed by the Works Progress Administration in 1937. Though it's not very clear, in the distance is the skyline of Boston. And this would bring hundreds of people at 5 a.m. to actually participate in a sunrise service. There was also a Roman Catholic service at Castle Island in South Boston. Here at the Donald Mackay Monument, he was the great shipbuilder, we see hundreds of people that came at sunrise to participate in an Easter Sunday sunrise service. These were things that were different than actually going to a service in a church, but it was an important thing to realize that if you did, you probably heard some of the finest music of the entire calendar year. Here is Trinity Church in downtown Boston. Trinity is the oldest Episcopal place of worship in Boston. Originally, it was on Summer Street, the site of the old Filene specialty store. It would move to the Back Bay in 1872 after the church was destroyed in the Great Boston Fire of 1872. But you also began to realize, looking at this church, Tiffany windows, Lafarge windows, and magnificent murals. Only 50 years previously, the people had actually, in that instance, celebrated in white painted meeting houses. Now, in the latter part of the 19th century, the Trinity Church is a good example, not only of a very beautiful church designed by H.H. Richardson, but even at the time of its construction, was one of the 10 most important buildings in the United States. We also see here at the Cathedral of the Holy Cross, the Roman Catholic Cathedral, when it was built between 1875 and 1880 on Washington Street in Boston's South End, was not only designed by Patrick Keeley, one of the foremost Catholic architects in the United States, but it could seat over 1,100 people at any given time. To give you an idea, on Easter Sunday morning, there were 6 services. So you can imagine the number of people going to the cathedral. But one church took it to a new step. And as we see here, this was a dramatic and novel Easter offering and was presented in 1938 at the Union Square Baptist Church on Walnut Street in Somerville by the Reverend Harold Willard Arthur. The church had been founded in 1885 and was a large shingle-style Romanesque church with a soaring bell tower and a large congregation. The large electrically lighted board, seen in the distance, of our Book of Golden Memories Easter offering, surmounted by an electric cross, was on the altar, and 2 angels, Greta Long on the left and Beatrice Metz on the right, hold electrified wands that would illuminate the book as members of the congregation brought up their offering and placed it in the Easter basket to support the church school classes and organization. Can you see when your dollar amount is put on the board beside your name? This was one of the most successful fundraisers the church ever had. But there was also the fact that Easter was something that encompassed all of us, and this African-American man with his grandchild is outside of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Boston's Fenway. The granddaughter actually has a stuffed Easter bunny. So you begin to see in some ways, the whole aspect is it's not just religious, it's also secular. But you see in this instance that this was something that would lead to the Easter parade. Now, the Easter parade was big business, and beginning in the 1930s, just after the Great Depression, people would leave their places of worship and walk towards the Commonwealth Avenue Mall in Boston's Back Bay. Here, the people are actually on Berkeley Street, so I assume they're leaving the First Church of Boston, now First and Second Church of Boston, to walk towards Commonwealth Avenue. Obviously, the 2 sisters on the right, they actually have huge corsages, and the 2 on the left are either the son and daughter of one or the other. But they're beautifully dressed. And I love the fact that the young man actually has a top hat, cutaway, and striped trousers, something that we never see anymore, but I remember as ushers as a child. Many people would come out, and this was Governor Christian Herter, his wife, and his 2 children. Now, granted, Herter looks like a typical businessman or even politician of the 1930s, but you realize in some ways Easter finery was something that was not only a part of Easter, but this was during the Great Depression, so they may have reused clothing. They're not quite as stylish as we'll see of other people. But in that instance, this mother with her 3 children shows a well-dressed woman in a luxurious silver-tipped fox fur stole walking down Commonwealth Avenue on Easter Sunday in 1938 with her 3 children, hand in hand. And though the daughter is well-dressed in a dress, coat, hat, and gloves, her sons are turned out as miniature gentlemen in their dapper morning coats, Eton collars and rep ties, boutonnieres, and miniature top hats. The detachable stiff Eton collar had been introduced to British society in the 19th century and became a part of the school uniform of boys at Eton College. In that way, some of them would actually create a sensation. Now, the O'Neill family of Jamaica Plain was probably one of the most famous and, of course, prolific in any Boston family. Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill, seen on the left-hand side, had 12 daughters in 12 years. And the 13th year, a little boy was born. Well, it was said that the O'Neills wanted their daughters to be dressed in matching finery so the family could stroll along the Commonwealth Avenue Mall alongside the Boston Brahmas who normally commanded the news. She was a seamstress, and she would not only design their dresses, which of course are coats over the dress, but her own. She began the day after Easter, and it would take her at least 12 months to continue to do 12 dresses. Well, during this period of time, they were in every newspaper, and they were feted at the Somerset Hotel, where they were entitled to lunch. But you also began to see in this instance in 1957, the O'Neills parade along Commonwealth Avenue Mall, having achieved local fame for not only participating in the Easter parade for many years, but appearing in their matching Easter finery and gloves that their mother annually made for them. And from left to right are Jane Deary, Barbara Wampole, Maureen Clunan, and Evelyn, Virginia, Mary, Julie, Danielle, Frances, and on the far right, Daniel O'Neill Jr., and of course their mother, directly behind them with their father, she in Stone Mountain furs. You began to see as these girls got older and even married, they would still continue the tradition. And they became famous for all of their beautiful clothing made by hand by their mother. But there was another family, and that were the Houghtons. And seen on Commonwealth Avenue Mall in their houndstooth cloak sleeve coats and white bonnets are from left to right, Agnes Houghton, the mother, Rita, Maureen, Eileen, Kathleen, Sheila, Brenda, and Charles Houghton, and their father, Charles Houghton Jr. Well, the whole aspect is she didn't sew, but she had a seamstress in Somerville, Massachusetts, that would actually sew an outfit for each of her children through the years. And in that instance, seen here, and this is 1960, they were really quite an attractive family. So not only the O'Neills, but the Houghtons were only 2 of many people. And they went the gamut, from the rich and the poor, black and white. The whole aspect was Easter Sunday parade was fun. Some of the photographs that I show in this instance, 2 little girls in their Easter finery. Not only did they have bonnets, but the ubiquitous handbag. I don't know what a child would put in the handbag. Maybe candy from the Easter basket, maybe a handkerchief. But these were things, in some ways, you began to see the creative sense of a mother or grandmother. The young boy on the right-hand side is in his nice plaid checked blazer, but the little girls are in their Easter finery in gorgeous colors, again, with a bonnet and, of course, the handbag. Well, people had to realize that by that period, it wasn't just the costumes the children would don, it was also the aspect of candy. And unlike you, I looked forward to Easter Sunday morning for the candy that was there. It was usually a little bit better than Halloween because I knew my parents and grandfather had bought it. But this photograph that appeared on the cover of the book, as I mentioned, had come in black and white. But I loved the Easter baskets, which were simply woven strips of wood, very thin wood, with a handle, and they could be filled with a variety of different things. And as I mentioned, chocolate Easter bunnies, eggs, and even chocolate eggs, but with that plastic straw, something that was horrendous. But candy was an important feature, and if you were going to someone's house for Easter Sunday dinner, why not bring them a box of chocolates? Does anybody remember Schrafft's It was in Sullivan Square in Charlestown. It was one of the largest manufacturers of candy in the United States. And not only did they do themed candy, St. Patrick's Day, Valentine's Day, of course, even Halloween, but they did these boxes that went the gamut from 1 pound to 5 pounds. I hope I got a 5-pounder. But this woman has a beautiful little bonnet. She's got a wonderful sheaf of lilies and tulips and hyacinths. But you began to realize Schrafft's was a big deal. In that instance, there was also Fanny Farmer candy. And Fanny Farmer, that has nothing to do with the great cookbook author Fanny Farmer, was something that had started in the teens of the 20th century, but they had small stores throughout, not just the Boston area, but throughout New England. Here, a couple in their Easter finery, and he's holding a box of Fanny Farmer old-time candies, leaves the Old North Church in Boston's North End. So you began to see these once very popular producers of candy would actually go out of business. But Whitman's Chocolates is still in existence, and you usually can get them $5. And they're actually something that's a traditional standby. It says it's the season's most popular messenger. Well, on the top row, and there are 2 rows, is always a milk chocolate messenger. And in that instance, if anybody touches it before I get it, they have to actually allow me to have the one below. This is something that not only shows a woman in a fantastic Easter bonnet, but she's actually giving a Whitman sampler. Beautiful things, delicious candy, but it was also something that they would give flowers. Now, when I was a child, my parents did not drive, and when we went to visit my grandparents, we would actually have to take the elevated railway. And when we got off, we would always see these stands, like bleacher stands, of potted plants. They'd be in clay pots, and they'd be hyacinths, not only hydrangeas, tulips, and daffodils. But Easter lilies were the greatest of all. Here at Mahoney's Rocky Ledge in Winchester, they're actually seeing 3 children and 2 Easter bunnies actually swamped by Easter lilies. These would be begun in December and grown in the greenhouses so that by the time Easter arrived, there'd be hundreds of Easter lilies available. But during that period, another thing that took a little bit of a hint from Easter was the Easter Seals campaign. Now, the Easter Seal helped crippled children, and seen here are Tenley Albright and Gail Ann Arsenault, and an Easter Seal rehabilitation treatment recipient holding a bumper strip where they were attached to Miss Albright's 1957 Porsche 356A 1600cc Speedster. Tenley Albright was not just an Olympic skating champion in 1956, the 1952 Olympic silver medalist, the 1953 and 1955 world champion, the 1953 and 1955 North American champion, and the 1952 to 1956 United States national champion, but she served as 1957 as chairman of the statewide SEAL campaign. Many people don't realize that she went on to become a well-known surgeon. And Martha Horsley, where are you? She and I knew Tenley Albright because we were associated with the New England Baptist Hospital where she was for most of her career. Well, Tenley Albright was not just an attractive woman, she was well educated. She was educated at Radcliffe and later the Harvard Medical School. But she became an important part of the Boston Easter Seal campaign because she had polio. As polio, she could have been crippled, but her family made her join the Boston Skating Club, which was then on in Allston. I can't remember the name of the street. But there she practiced and had massages daily. Well, seen here, the Easter Seals Bonnet Brunch, which was held in April of 1957, Tenley Albright on the left, the Massachusetts chairman of the Easter Seal campaign, drew as a door prize, which was a new Easter bonnet for Ruby Graham, seen at the microphone. Well, Ruby Graham already had a lovely hat, but she was a well-known radio personality. This raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for Easter Seals. But in that instance, you also began to realize food is really an important part of any holiday celebration. Now, in this aspect of Easter, one might have a roast ham, as we see here. It could be a roast turkey. It could be a wonderful piece of beef. But the family around the table in their finery look at something probably with the best china and best crystal. It was something to look forward to. But the whole aspect was there was a company by the name of Armour. Armour had bought out Chamberlain Company, which my father was a vice president of. He later became a vice president of Armour. They would always have things that went the gamut of everything that was new. But here, for their 75th anniversary triumph, for an Easter feasting, was an Armour Star ham. This was something that was not only the finest piece of meat available, but it was also something, when it was studded with cloves, as well as pieces of pineapple, was a delicious feast for Easter Sunday. But other people, such as Birdseye, decided that they too wanted to compete. And as you see on the upper portion, the family holding their hand to their head, Easter salute to the noblest roaster of them all. Well, I guess they wanted a roast chicken. But they didn't just have the roast chicken, because Birdseye offered frozen vegetables. So it could be something that was really as wonderful as an Armour ham. But there was also that one woman who taught all of us how to cook a la Française. I just finished a book on S.S. Pierce and Company, and she was an employee of the company in the 1960s. They had asked her to actually make gourmet meals out of their canned foods. So she might combine canned ham with the various other things, along with a good splash of Madeira, to actually become an Easter feast. Seen here on WGBH television channel 2, she became the French chef. And not only did she show people how simple it was to simply roast a chicken or a turkey, but also to create a delicious dinner that was perceived as gourmet. Of course, she'd been graduated from the Cordon Bleu in Paris, but she was somebody who made this easy, and she was the progenitor, bless you, of many different cooks on television. But this wonderful photograph, I love this little girl. This straw-hatted little girl looks both wide-eyed and covetously at a slice of ham, yams, and peas on her dinner plate at the dining room table before the family says prayers of thanks on Easter. And with wide-open eyes, not only she but the family looked forward to the traditional food served at Easter, obviously with a glass of milk. And of course, you began to see in this instance, there was also dessert. Easter egg cake was something you could make not only with swan's down golden yellow cake mix, but with baker's unsweetened chocolate. This was not only delicious, but it was made in the shape of an Easter egg, and of course covered in chocolate, along with jelly beans and different decorations. These were things that were delicious, but they looked wonderful. But I think the whole aspect is that when you see this one, Easter bunnies and eggs made with my Duff's gingerbread mix. I don't remember Duff's, but Duff's was something that you could make a gingerbread cake, as you see on the lower left-hand side. But Dorothy Duff could show you how to make Easter cookies shaped like a rabbit, as well as Easter eggs that you could then write Happy Easter on. These were beautifully done, a little bit different than what you might expect for an Easter basket, but it was something children loved. Well, in that instance, the Easter parade, which continued for over 50 years, would actually be disbanded in 1974. There was little interest. They'd get fewer than 150 people. And seen here on the last time, a father with his daughter would actually parade along the Commonwealth Avenue Mall. And because we know Easter can be late or early, it's actually a snow-covered Commonwealth Avenue Mall. But it was still a tradition in Boston, and many people looked to it as something that was really quite fun. But if you see here, the Easter ducklings done by Nancy Schoen not only wear their Easter bonnets, but they actually are decorated for every event and holiday in Boston. It's never known who does this. They must do it at the crack of dawn. But the bronze ducklings in the Boston Public Garden were sculpted by Nancy Schoen as a recreation of the mallard family in Robert McCluskey's children's classic, Make Way for Ducklings. And seen here are the ducklings: Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Dwack, Whack, Pack, and Quack are led by Mrs. Mallard. As you can see, not only with wonderful bonnets, but of course a little scarf, because I guess it was a little early for Easter that year. Well, the whole aspect is my book, which I do have a few copies of, is Easter Traditions in Boston. One revisits the long-held traditions of decorating Easter eggs, decorating an Easter tree, choosing an Easter bonnet, children's Easter egg hunts, attending Easter services in churches or sunrise services before joining the O'Neills and the Houghtons, who annually participated in matching Easter outfits in the Easter Parade on the Commonwealth Avenue Mall in Boston's Back Bay. Bostonians have a shared tradition of this very special holiday, and though it was ignored by the Puritans, we can fondly remember in this book how our parents and grandparents celebrated the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Well, looking at the cover of the book with these three children, you begin to realize in some ways many of our holidays, which started off as a religious holiday, have become a little bit different in their interpretations. Easter is still a time to not only see the resurrection of Jesus, but also to realize in some ways that today children not only look at their Easter basket, but wear their bonnets and Easter Sunday clothing, and we begin to realize that these traditions are something that we all share. The aspect of a holiday can be very different, but whether it's secular or religious, it's a special holiday throughout the year. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.